Good evening. Welcome to the Budget Subcommittee meeting of October 13th, 2021. In keeping with an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021, this meeting will be conducted remotely over Zoom. Attendance by the board members will be remote, and remote attendance shall count towards quorum. All votes will be taken through roll call. This meeting will be broadcast live and recorded on ECAT. There will be public participation at the end of this meeting. All questions or comments shall be submitted in the Q&A feature, and please include your name and address. Okay, so let's get started. The first item on the agenda is the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, county funding update. Connor?
Sure. Thank you, Jackie. So some good news to report here. I think the last time we were together, I had indicated that we had all been working, the folks across town and school government on effectively lobbying the county over the summer upon our initial kind of realization that the way that the local aid money built into the Federal American Rescue Plan Act signed in March was divvied up was that county governments were receiving effectively $2 for every one that municipalities would receive directly, which makes a lot of sense because in a lot of the United States, county governments provide a lot more direct services than municipal governments do. The inverse is true here in New England. And so there's a mismatch there and a lot of concern from Easton and other folks throughout Bristol, Plymouth, and Norfolk County on how and whether and in what amounts those dollars would be accessible to the municipal governments, which are responsible for, health, safety, education, and all of these kind of critical components intimately tied to the intent of that federal act. And so late in August or early in September, I believe the county voted that they plan to make available 90% of their received funds on a per capita basis to the member municipalities, including us, which is great. I still don't have a timeline on exactly when their application portal it will be open. It should be soon. They're getting plenty of phone calls about that. But the goal is this fall that the county, Bristol County, would have basically an application portal where cities and towns would be able to submit requests for disbursement of eligible funds under ARPA. They've issued some preliminary reports on the county website that closely mirror what are called the expenditure categories outlined in guidance from the United States Treasury. So there's kind of the four big picture items that are statutorily enabled for spending in the law. And then, as is typical with broad reaching legislation like this, the agency responsible for interpreting that, in this case, the United States Treasury, has issued voluminous rules and regulations interpreting the law for its implementation. And within those rules, there is now interim guidance for states and local governments, getting into a lot more detail on different expense categories, which gives more of a roadmap to us on understanding what is and is not eligible from a kind of programmatic standpoint. You could look at it that way, of either it's something that's explicitly called for or enabled in the law, such as providing increased access to early education, which is how we will use some of that funding to reduce tuition for kindergarten this year and eliminate it next year, working with the schools. That's programmatically eligible, and it's very clear cut in ARPA as one of the intents of the law. So that's straightforward. And then there are buckets that are much more general, such as revenue replacement. And the way that that works is you have that kind of counterfactual calculation of what your revenue is on a calendar year basis against a much more enjoyable life where COVID never happened. And instead of, just costing out true net decreases in revenue, it forecasts, what would have happened if your revenue grew at the national pre-COVID average annually, which is 4.1%. And whatever that gap is, you can tap those ARPA dollars as a funding source in your general fund budgets and use them for any service town or school government would traditionally provide. So that's significantly more flexible. It's like any one-time money, however, though, it is one time. You don't want to kind of lean on it too excessively and build a fiscal cliff for yourself for the end of a performance period in 2024. Back to the county aspect of it. So their preliminary report basically copy and paste what are called ECs, those expenditure categories that are laid out in United States Treasury guidance. And I'll share a copy of that guidebook with everyone after. It's online. It's a public record. It will probably put you to sleep, but it's 30 pages, which is much better than the US Treasury's interim final rule, which was 150. And you can at least kind of just go to the appendix and get a good idea of these are the kind of buckets of programmatically eligible spending categories. Things like household assistance for utilities, funding programs to deal with mental health supports and interventions. So things like a social worker on the town side. So I'll share that with the subcommittee. From here, I'll be in communication with the county to get a better idea on when the window for that application is open. And one of the things that we all still need to learn, the kind of big picture marquee item is great. Most of the money will be made available. And now there's kind of more administrative questions of in what increments and when. So the 2.6 million direct to Easton from the federal government by way of the state DOR is released in 2 payments, 1.3 million this spring and another 12 months after that. The same is happening. The county is receiving all of their local, municipal money. They received 55 million this spring and will receive the second half next spring. So it's a kind of question of administration and disbursement of the management of the funds, which the county is ultimately responsible for, even if they pass through to us. They maintain audit liability and a variety of other components, which is why they're holding on to a portion of the money to hire law firms and accounting firms and all of that good stuff. There's a question that remains to be answered, and it may have been. I haven't been to every meeting, so if it has, I apologize. Do they intend on dispersing the funding all at once in 2 annual tranches like the Treasury? Do they want to carve it up and kind of force it to be spread out more over the 3.5 to 4 year performance period? So those things remain to be seen. Will have some level of impact on our planning, but nothing I think is too dramatic, because where this all really originated is, Easton's perspective and most folks following this is that we wanted to understand, particularly folks in roles like mine and Dr. Cabral's, what is the total capacity we have over time, so we can now do the work we need to do to come up with thoughtful and responsible plans to implement that money in a kind of steady and controlled manner, and not, say, great, $7 million goes out the door today and then it's gone. From here, I'll be hearing more from department heads. I'll be working with Dr. Cabral, and we'll be looking at needs across town and school departments to come up with what I think will probably be a preliminary report that I will issue this fall, making some kind of recommendations there. That I think this would be a great place to review, since it has representation from finance, select board, and schools, and take it from there. So that's my update. Happy to answer any questions about. I failed to mention the dollar amount. So 90% on a per capita basis is somewhere in the area of 4 million additional ARPA dollars that will, again, it's not in the bank, but that's the estimate we're working with.
Any questions for Connor?
Connor, the meetings that are taking place, or if they are, how far in advance are they scheduling? Is there one a month that counties or that towns can attend?
It's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I think they meet somewhat regularly, but the county is governed by open meeting law, just like we are. So their obligation is just to post an agenda 2 days in advance. They've been really responsive. Frankly, they have their treasurer Chris Saunders has been really good. So even if we don't make it there, or don't know about it, he'll kind of debrief the town managers across the county and keep people in the loop. I think that, the major item of concern for schools and towns has been satisfied, I think, which is confirmation that the funding will be available. Now it's kind of more the administrative details that need to be worked out. And I don't know how much of that is really done by the elected commission versus folks like the treasurer and attorneys and accountants and things like that. But they post agendas on their website is the short answer.
And Connor, obviously you know this, and probably most people here know this, but just for the large viewing audience, I think it's important to note that the 4 million additional is total over 3 years. It's not 4 million
today.
In year 1, 4 million,
Correct.
year 2, 4 million.
Yeah, correct. That means like that capacity will be there during the performance period, which is years, but we don't even know when that is. Hopefully chunks of it shortly, but yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Alicia.
And it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it has to be encumbered by 2024, but it can be used up until 2026.
That's my read of it. I don't know how that will work with non-capital related expenses. I think that maybe remains to be seen, Wendy, unless you know more than I do. But I think like having the money outlaid for a capital expense. So because there are certain capital items authorized by this as well, facilities upgrades, sewer, water. But I think under municipal finance, typically how things work, and we're not in a typical world anymore, but typically you wouldn't be kind of encumbering like a salary for someone 2 years in advance. I don't know, Wendy, if you disagree with that assessment, but I think conceptually, at least where I am at now at this early stage, as far as any programs that are supported with ARPA funds, I'm really thinking of it fiscal 20, some portion of this year, but really 23 and 24. In that performance period, but I'm not assuming that there would be programs made available by personnel in 2026. We'll learn more, but Wendy, is my read. Do you agree with that, or you're muted?
Sorry. Yeah, I agree with that. It's very unusual to have any extensive funding, grant funds, or any entitlements that allow you to do encumbrances in different years, because if you're encumbering, you're actually putting it for a particular person. That's different than a projection, say. So, but Connor's right, it's not really a normal world anymore. So we'll definitely look into it.
Right.
And is there a requirement on how we hold those funds once we get them?
Jackie, you're talking about like from an actual accounting, and like it doesn't need to be in an interest generating account.
Yeah.
Wendy, do you know?
I have not heard anything in particular. We don't have it in a separate interest bearing account. It's just in with our general funds. So we're accounting for it separately in the ledger. It's in its own fund, but it's not in a separate bank account.
And
which is, I think, how it was dispersed to all the cities and towns in that first preliminary application period directly from the DOR, right? I mean, we told them this is our bank account. And they said, okay, here you go.
Okay. And with the reporting requirements, is it like quarterly, annually? Are there specific time frames to report how we're using these funds?
There are. So we're what's called a non-entitlement unit of government. And because we are in the scheme of local and county governments relatively small, I think the requirement in the regulations is that if you have a population of less than 250,000, you fall in that NEU category, where you still have to report from a compliance perspective, but the level of frankly effort and product you need to produce for reporting is lesser, kind of commensurate with the smaller staff you have. I think there was originally supposed to be a preliminary report due from all NEUs, this October, and they delayed that till next spring because most NEUs in the United States have spent very little of this because it's taken all summer to get rules from the United States. And you have this kind of whose money is it anyway game show unfolding throughout the whole Northeast. So they've delayed the first report until spring. And then Wendy, are the NEU reports required to be quarterly or is it annual?
They're annual.
Once a year. It's a great question. And all this is in the document that I'll share for everyone as
Great,
well.
thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Well, that's certainly good news.
It is. Yeah.
So that's exciting. Yeah.
Um,
All right. So the next item is the special town meeting warrant. Special town meeting is November 8th. Connor?
Sure. So Wendy just circulated about 20 minutes ago in advance draft of what the warrant will look like for the select board's final review Monday night. This has all the final figures in it for finances, things of interest to budget subcommittee, stabilization fund. So part of, I guess, the good news, this is the only good news day ever for budget subcommittee in the past couple of years. For a variety of reasons, large departmental turnbacks, particularly the schools, availability of funds like CARES, a portion of revenue replacement from ARPA, and just really conservative estimates on revenue that were exceeded, particularly in areas like building permits were, I think, 50% over what we budgeted. Last year, our free cash is very good this year. So it's in the area of $4.7 million, which is quite a bit. Normally, it's the highest it was before in 2016 was 2.6. It's been trending down since then. So this is a quite a large free cash certification that will position our reserves in a much healthier spot as we advance through the kind of ARPA performance period and the building out of COVID period, which is good. So part of that is, the town's standing policy is to transfer a quarter of free cash into stabilization. So the first article would do that, and a quarter of that would be 1.175 million. That would put stabilization at 4.73 million, which will be good. It's the far and away the best it's ever been. It also shows how far we've come, that we are still just kind of barely getting into the neck of the woods that we ought to have been in the whole time, which is you want your free cash and stabilization to be close to 10% of your annual spending. And so even with this kind of exceptional set of circumstances, we are only now just barely getting to that point. So I'm not trying to be a rainy cloud on good news, but I do think it's important, that when we talk about these things, it doesn't sound, to whatever our constituency who views the subcommittee meetings is that there's some hue that everyone's just kind of flush with cash. These are unique circumstances we don't expect to repeat. And even with that, we're just kind of getting into where we ought to be. We're doing a bond issuance Monday night associated with school building. And Moody's, we had a really good conversation during our bond rating, which will be published this week, that in pretty much every single area except our reserve balance, Easton's positioned for a bond rating upgrade. Nearly every other account, our management, our community, our development, our school system is punching significantly above our bond rating of a AA3. But they were very frank and said, you're all making wonderful progress on building reserves, which we've all worked on for years, but we're still not where we need to be. So that's really the area that we've been focusing a lot of our financial management on. And so this is great news, but just trying to measure it against the kind of goalposts that we're trying to get in. This is where we've been trying to move towards for quite some time.
So Connor, again, just for people maybe not on this committee, so 10% would be like an $8 million in free cash, and you're saying we're going to be like 4.
Well, you would want somewhere in the area of $8 million of a balance of the sum of your stabilization and your free cash. And we will, prior to some of that free cash being spent for capital, be in that area. We will spend roughly 1.3 million on the supplemental capital, which is a, healthy but not Certainly not a spending spree capital supplement. So we'll be in the area of 7-ish after that, which is, again, a much better position than we have been in, but it is still that it's less than the 10% goal. But it is good news, but we're not kind of tripping over money in any way. That's just a responsible place that we're going to need to be, because we're going to continue to have headwinds from COVID and its impacting the economy for years.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
And was that all pretty much related to COVID type savings, or was there anything else notable that was driving the free cash number?
Well, I mean, technically all of this happened during COVID, but I think there was a lot of different factors. I think a lot of the economists' forecasts that we rely on to make our revenue projections were more bleak than reality turned out to be, thankfully. And so certain areas, like building permits, for example, we projected just kind of very marginal, like I think 1% increases to local receipts, including building permits, but they not only blew past that, they came in almost 50% above that, because we're in this really bizarre set of economic circumstances right now where there's been a tremendous amount of economic suffering for some, while others have done very well and are spending more money than ever on housing and on new construction and on, pulling the kind of joke, everyone was stuck at home looking at their kitchen and was like, man, I really hate these cabinets, better fix them now. And the volume of building permits we couldn't have anticipated. So there are oddities like that. And then there are savings made possible through being able to lean, I'll speak just for my operations, and Dr. Cabral can weigh in on the school side, but there are certain areas in like public safety and public works overtime related to either HVAC or backfilling for quarantines or things like that, where we were able to lean on FEMA or CARES that therefore spared $1 out of the operating budget.
Thank you.
I can say from the school side, Jen, that it was definitely, it was all COVID related savings for us. For a good chunk of the year, we had half the students in school. We were transporting half the students. So we saved a good chunk of it on transportation costs. We also, while we lost revenue for things like pay and ride and food service, then we got all the food free from the federal government. We had several staff members that were given health accommodations because of COVID. And so they took a year leave of absence. And so we were able to save on their salary for the year. Again, it wouldn't be a recurring cost because now they're back, right? But for that year, we were able to get a long-term sub in the position. And so they were not in the building. So I think pretty much everything, and similar to what Connor said about overtime for nurses and custodians, that's a line in our budget annually that we could charge to CARES. We could charge to MEMA. And so, it's really all COVID related on our side of the house.
Thank you. It really drives home the point that there's been a lot of fiscal responsible choices made in this vein when given a situation where we had a really bad, bleak thing on the horizon. We've been able to kind of come out of that and make a silver lining, if you will, financially. So that's very positive. And
I want to give a ton of credit to Dr. Cabral and her department heads, as well as the town department heads, because all of us were on the phone very, very regularly throughout COVID. You had the kind of dual or triple or never-ending list of crises, the public health aspect, the social emotion aspect. There was also a severe financial one, and trying to figure out, okay, there are certain like school targeted federal dollars, there's general ones, there's town ones. FEMA changed dramatically after Biden was elected, where they reopened it effectively back to January of 2020 and significantly expanded eligibility. But there's a lot of accounting and tracking and kind of quantifying and determination of what's eligible and what's not. And we all really prioritized as a team, making sure that we leaned on and took advantage of, to the fullest extent possible, all of those different buckets of federal relief funding, and I think quite effectively. And I think this free cash shows that. So thank you to the schools and the town department heads.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
Thank you. Anything else?
Not on that.
Okay. Do you
And so then the rest of
go
the
on to
warrant is your capital stabilization fund. That's a reimbursement for Medicare associated with ambulance transports. So we are proposing putting that in capital stabilization because we will need a new ambulance someday. Article 3 is restoring the $200,000 to the special education reserve fund that the schools leaned on, I think, in fiscal 21. So out of, I believe, a free cash. Article 4 is an idea the chiefs have talked about, and I was looking at the warrant and the SPED reserve fund and thought, gee, that's a really good idea. I should steal it. And the law allows for a similar idea, right? So for school budgets, special education costs are very, very, very hard to predict year over year. The town side, injured on duty costs are extremely hard to predict year over year. So we have catastrophic insurance coverage for the medical aspect of injured on duty, which is a state prescribed benefit for police and firefighters injured on the performance of their jobs. But you also have to pay the salary of that individual, and then they're out, and then you have to pay somebody usually to backfill on overtime. So there's incidental costs that are usually just borne out of the operating budgets for these departments. And depending on the length of the injury absence, those can become really substantial and can basically kind of blow up the remainder of that department's annual budget. And you end up robbing Peter to pay Paul, not doing training or things like that. So we figured, this would be a good time to establish a similar idea. So it functions, I think, similar. I think the Special Education Reserve Fund, the school committee controls. Is that right? And that gives you the flexibility, so you don't need to call a town meeting for a $60,000 expenditure because that's cumbersome. This would have the select board would be able to disperse it in the event that there was, significant costs impacting police or fire related to an injury. Without having to go to the finance committee or to town meeting. So that's what.
And I'm sorry, did you say, I don't have it in front of me, how much are you going to put into that fund?
100,000 for now. Any questions about that article? Okay. So Article 5 is a placeholder in case a bill comes up. We're nothing yet, I don't think, Wendy, and usually it just gets dismissed on the floor of town meeting if there's no bill.
Yeah, that'll be dismissed.
Article 6 is amending the fiscal 22 budget. So this is normally a pretty unspectacular item pre-COVID, and I'm happy to report that it's returning to its unspectacular self. Last year's fall supplemental budget was much more meaningful because there's so much more up in the air of state aid and things like that. So this amendment is making some minor tweaks for some training costs in some of our town departments, funding the fire collective bargaining agreement, which was the only one not done before town meeting in the spring. Regional school assessments increased. So the regional vocational schools assessment to Easton presupposed a, for lack of a better word, discount by them being allowed to apply ESSER 2 funds to pay for portions of their district assessments. And they have since been directed that they cannot do that. So we need to pay the difference. And I also believe it's related to the Student Opportunity Act and the net school spending requirements increasing for the regional school. And no, that doesn't bring any money to Easton Public Schools, as everyone on this meeting is well aware. Unfortunately, the much venerated SAO didn't change minimum aid districts. And then the real significant change is actually a decrease of the exempt mature debt and interest a decrease of almost $730,000 due to the reduction in the amount of exempt debt to be raised for the school project, which is super exciting because, as I think everyone on this meeting is likely aware, the actual bid cost came in significantly below the budget. So we don't need as much of that exempt appropriation. So, and I think Wendy, the number we're decreasing it to is reflective of our information from Hilltop and our bond advisors for the actual debt we're issuing Monday night, right?
Yeah, that number that's in there was still a little bit of an estimate. We just had the bond sale today. And the amount is going to be a little bit lower, but we can just keep it as it is, and whatever we don't spend, we'll just reserve and raise less the following year.
But right now we're I almost feel like I'm tempting fate and jinxing it, but right now, I mean, we're trending in a very positive way on the cost of that building project, and because it is an exempt, a Prop 2.5 exempt project, all the savings on construction at the end of the day reduce the actual tax increase to pay for it. So that's really a wonderful thing. I feel like all the news that we all read all the time is how everything costs $5 trillion now, and you try to buy like a really low rent burrito from, I shouldn't name a business name, and it's $20, but it's nice that on the largest building project we've ever done, that it seems things are trending in a good way. So we will be adjusting the budget to reduce that by almost $750,000. It doesn't mean we're spending less on the school. It's just we don't need as much debt service. So any questions on and that's it on the operating side. Any questions on that?
Not a question, but I just love the expression low rent burrito.
Yeah, that's you can use that if you would like. I'll try it again at 7:30 and so.
Doesn't everyone rent their burritos?
Millennials do, yes.
Isn't that? Yes, I thought so.
Common practice for my kind.
Anything
Okay.
else? No.
Capital supplement, Article 7. So some of the normal stuff for the fall, a couple of police vehicles, IT server and computers for the town side, school technology, I believe computers and projectors, although I think we just made it more kind of general to provide some flexibility there. I'll get back to the feasibility study because that's really kind of one notable item. Permit system upgrade. So we were a leader in online permitting, and then 10 years passed, and now our e-permit systems are frankly very dated. And they lack pretty basic back-end administrative features for staff and boards and commissions, and a lot of basic quality of life features for applicants, whether they're businesses or individuals. The most glaring example is that because we did it incrementally and over many, many years, every department has its own discrete siloed software that does not speak to one another. And so you need to create a unique set of credentials on both the staff and user side for every single department, which really takes away from the usability. It slows down reviews. It's particularly for mom and pop shops, or if you have a contractor who just needs to pull a relatively easy permit, it just creates more hurdles to people kind of doing the right thing. So this would fund an upgrade there. And then a couple of vehicles out for DPW that were deferred in the spring due to lack of funds. So the total capital is like 1.3, which is not enormous given the free cash certification, but it's something we reviewed with capital committee and felt we could responsibly do. One thing that is not here is additional road funding, which is something that we've spent some attention on at the finance committee and other committees, because this year, I think the subcommittee is probably where we were for a couple of years borrowing $500,000 a year to supplement our state road program, because the state, much like Chapter 70 doesn't adequately fund public education without significant local contributions. Chapter 90 is a roadway program that's been level funded with a couple of exceptions for like 15 years. And the cost of fixing roads has certainly not been level. So we lose progress every year. We were supplementing that with roughly $500,000 of borrowing each year. But that was never a long-term strategy that got expensive quick. And so we stopped doing that a year or two ago. Thankfully, this year, Majority Leader Cronin was able to get an earmark funded in the budget for $300,000 for roadway work in Easton on top of our existing Chapter 90. So we actually got a good amount of road construction done, which if any of you drive here, you probably are very familiar with this summer, and there's some of that appropriation left over for next year. So adding money on that now would it would be difficult for DPW to revise that paving plan that quickly and have the ability to spend it as responsibly as they would like in next summer. So we did not, just in case, Mike, I know that's come up with Finance Committee a lot of roads. That's why we didn't add there. So the largest item is a feasibility phase study. So in 2019, before COVID, the Municipal Building Committee, working with DPW Director Field, asked him to update the 2014 Dorr and Whittier Facilities Assessment Report, which looked at and attempted to quantify the repair and replacement needs of all school and municipal buildings. A lot of that data was used in the feasibility phase for the early elementary school project that led to the Blanche Ames construction project. And a lot of the same conclusions can be drawn about municipal facilities, namely that it is in almost all regards cheaper and more effective to just completely replace some of the aged facilities than to try to repair them. At that time in 2019, the recommendation to the Municipal Building Committee was that at a minimum, police, fire, and DPW be completely replaced. These are facilities that are 50 plus years old. They do not meet many current health and safety codes. They don't meet stormwater regulations. Some of our buildings are not ADA accessible, like the water division of DPW. We don't have adequate space to store our fleet, so they're exposed to the elements, which makes them degrade faster, which means we have to replace them more frequently. It is a bad cycle. So they are, and also, frankly, they were designed and built when these departments had a quarter as many people working at them. So they're just almost nothing about them, with limited exception, is up to code or standards. So they need to be replaced. If we are going to get serious about that in the next 5-year window, we need to start taking some steps down that path now, including feasibility phase funding. And not unlike the early elementary school project, this would involve multiple buildings, multiple sites of land. And so a really important component of getting this funding moving now would be bringing an owner's project manager in, doing some schematic design, but also doing kind of site assessment, because it involves fire. There are service response time implications that we need to look at carefully and consider carefully. And whether or not we consolidate all 3 on one site, 2 out of 3 on one site, and have a sub site. Those things need to be ferreted out so we can come up with an actual project budget before doing things like considering detailed design or construction costs. It was November 2017 when feasibility funding for the school project was appropriated. It's been 4 years since then, and construction's ongoing and will wrap up in another year plus. So even when things move expeditiously, which they did for the school, you're looking at a 5 to 6 year window. So we think, again, this is an item that was in the capital plan, but was deferred due to lack of funds. And because of available free cash, we think it's important to start moving on this now. I don't know if anyone has any questions or feedback on the proposed capital adjustment.
Connor, I think we've talked about this, and just from my view on is that starting this now is very important, because we know that, as you mentioned, this is it takes a long time. Look at what it took to get the elementary school, and that was once we got through the hurdles for MSBA. So a lot of hurdles, a lot of different teams that need to be aligned. And as you mentioned, when it comes to emergency services, that adds a whole nother layer. So I just think kudos that we're getting this underway now.
Caroline?
Well, I just will point out that it's really unfortunate that we don't have access to a major grant as we do with these schools. I feel like that was a huge selling point, but also because we were dealing with welfare of children. And this is a little different as well, because I don't know, I was in a basement office with no windows for about 30 years with mold. So I know that, adults can somehow tolerate a lot of things that children can't necessarily, or we wouldn't want them to. But I do think it makes sense to start looking at this as an overall project. Is there any discussion ever of doing it in increments, or is this just seen as absolutely necessary to do all three? I mean, it just sounds like a lot, but I'm just wondering if
it would be a lot. Yeah. I mean, that could come out of the feasibility phase. I would be shocked if it does, just from our own experience here, looking at, Center, Moreau, and Parkview. It's costs go in one direction and it's up. So delaying replacement of one doesn't really save us any, and interest isn't going to get any cheaper either, right? So there are some factors that are in our favor. I mean, we will look at it, and there are, one of the things to be considered, particularly with fire, depending on where the locations are determined, is which of the existing stations stay on and in what capacity. So that remains to be seen, but as a general rule, the recommendation is replace at a minimum Lothrop Street Police and Fire, DPW on Center Street, and water on Bay Road. So you're looking at a minimum of those kind of 3/4 buildings.
I have to say, I've always loved the fact that the police and fire department were so close to many thousand citizens that were in place for 8-10 hours a day.
Yep.
I mean, children obviously are citizens. People forget that sometimes. So that's, I don't know, I feel a little sad that, I do understand that you couldn't have a massive three-way building on that location, but it is in a way unfortunate, because I do feel like that has been extremely helpful to the schools, but to those very precious citizens of ours.
Right, and that's exactly the kind of thing that you need to look at when looking at these things. We understand that it's not just real estate, it's understanding response times, and and to be clear, that Lothrop Street site's inadequate for the 2 buildings that are there right now. It is way too small. So you by today's standards, you wouldn't even put a police and fire station there, but it's there are aspects that are great, like it's across the street from the schools, and there are aspects that are not, like they have to go through like 10 stop signs to get to Main Street in an ambulance with a lot of pedestrian traffic, which is not,
and compete with school traffic
and school buses, and there's no perfect anywhere, right? But believe me, we know, and it's something we are being conscious and cognizant of, and part of why we want to start bringing an OPM and other design professionals in to start helping us, because there are some things that at first blush, again, look at the school project, that once you start bringing like traffic engineers and you say, oh, okay, well, maybe you can manage one centralized campus depending on the phasing of school start times and things like that. But they require a lot of thoughtful study. So we need to get that moving, but I hear your point.
Connor, I just want to mention one other thing. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I assume that you're talking about a debt exclusion override.
Yes, realistically, it would require a debt exclusion. Yeah.
I'm totally in favor of debt exclusion overrides on principle, so I'm not meaning to imply otherwise. I just wanted to confirm that is the route that we need to go.
Oh yes, yeah, and we would not, just like the question came up with feasibility for the school project in 2017, and no one shied away from that reality. And I skipped over one of your points, and I agree with you. It is a shame that the Commonwealth does not have a process in place for dealing with municipal facilities. It's like a perennial process. There's bills filed, including I think by Senator Timilty and Brady, on a very regular basis to create an MSBA type state authority using available state revenue or some other special revenue to create a program like this. And it would be, there's a huge need. Actually, Auditor Bump just published a report regarding the really sorry state of public safety, public works facilities and roads, mostly focused on Western Massachusetts, but is applicable to the entire Commonwealth, where she shined a light on the reality that you have some grant programs that are very good, and Easton has been very fortunate to benefit from, such as MassWorks. But when you look at the total annual ask versus what's dispersed, it's like a 4-to-1 margin, which shows that the level of need far exceeds the existing revenue pipelines that the state has available for localities. And so I agree with you. It is a shame, and we do regularly, and we'll continue to lobby and kind of make that case, because these are substantial projects.
Connor, on that note too, I want to thank you. Just so everyone knows, Connor, just on Tuesday, October 5th, sent on the heels of Auditor Bump's letter, then reached out to the Joint Committee on Ways and Means, and really just put out there very eloquently why other communities, not just Western Mass, need to have the same focus and attention. So if anyone, I don't know, is that public for people to read what you wrote, or how would they access that if they want to see it?
You could forward it to the subcommittee. It's a public.
Perfect.
I submitted it as
I'll do
testimony to the Joint Committee on Ways and Means.
Yep, I think it's worth.
Yeah, that's
I think
great.
it's worth everyone reading it because it was very well done, and puts the town of Easton, as well as many communities in the eastern part of the state, in a really good light. So thanks for doing that. And one other comment on the municipal buildings, and with all throughout Station 1, the police department, and DPW, I know Connor and his team are looking closely too, and have good relationships with Mansfield and the municipal joint facility that they put together, and obviously the costs that went into that. And
Right.
So that's kind of I look at it very similar to the 3 elementary schools, and having this opportunity now to both defer. It's a good cost avoidance exercise for us to kind of go down this path, and then to look at some efficiencies and some cost benefit to putting the 3 together in one campus. So I know you'll be looking very closely at that community.
We will. Yeah. And we've had the benefit. We had a shared project with SEMRAC as well, building a facility for multiple communities. So we have a lot of good experience here, and have done a lot of these kind of big projects, work with the schools and public works. And, the new fire chief was an assistant OPM in his past life as well. So we're, I think we have the right things in place. We just have to start walking down the road.
Thank you. Anything else on the warrant?
Just very standard stuff. A sick buyback required under a collective bargaining agreement that's grandfathered out for all town employees at this point. An appointment of trustees to the Ames Highway and School Fund. That's a fund that contributes roughly $400,000 a year to the budget, at the bequest of the late Oliver Ames Jr., I believe. Debt rescission and easement for the school, the new school, for underground utilities to the site of the early elementary school, and more septic loan program dollars. It's a program the Board of Health administers for residents in Easton to borrow at a low interest rate to do things like repair septic tanks or tie into public sewer systems, and it gets attached to their tax bill. I think they've lent over $3 million, 3.4 million, and this would be another 1 million. And there's no real risk to the town because it's attached to the property as an improvement lien. So if they don't pay or sell, it gets dealt with at closing. So that's it. It's all really important, very kind of finance heavy stuff. But it's kind of business. I hope 100 people show up. So please make all your friends go. I don't know, does anyone have any general questions about the warrant or town meeting that I didn't cover?
Okay, great. Then we'll move on. Fiscal year 23 budget outlook and calendar, Connor.
So winter is approaching, and so we'll have instruction memos coming out from Wendy and I for on the town side, running kind of concurrent to the schools process, to just start developing requests for fiscal 23. Developing kind of revenue forecasts will be interesting given how strange things have been. The state has been good with not cutting local aid. I'm right now operating on the assumption that's going to continue, so that's a relief. And then we'll, I know Wendy and I will be taking a much closer look at what our expectations are with local receipts, with things like building permits and excise tax. Since excise tax is a function of the price of a car, which is skyrocketed and things like that. So, overall, I'm certainly far less pessimistic than the past couple of years. But the big unknown, I think, for everyone is collective bargaining. That'll be the largest determinant of our financial operating position in the next 3 years, I think.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? No. Okay. Then we can move on to status reports from boards and committees. Dr. Cabral or Caroline, do you want to start us off with schools?
I think that you actually have a lot more information from what you've told me, because you've done some special research. So I think that would really be more appropriately provided by you, if you don't mind, Jackie. I know that you had a lot of discussions with administrators about the various funds and how they're being used and so on, if that's what you're talking about. I couldn't do that off the top of my head. So sorry, but you do know that you have done a lot of research on behalf of the school committee about these things. When you're talking about an update, maybe Dr. Cabral would be better off being the one to provide that type of update. I don't know.
Dr. Cabral, anything you want to share?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, so if you could throw me.
If there's anything about, well, we have collective bargaining coming up, like Connor said, so that's going to be in the next couple of months.
No, I totally agree with Connor. That's going to be the huge indicator of what we're going to need for the next 3 years. So it's actually hard to project anything else. Our commitment has been to free full-day kindergarten, and so we have to keep that in mind. As far as the collective bargaining, we anticipate starting in November with our first unit, and then we have 6 units. So it's going to take a while.
Yep. Yeah. School building project is moving along. Great.
Moving along very well. Connor already explained that we are under budget right now. We have a long way to go, so I certainly hope it stays that way. I would say the only, well, I can never say when a surprise comes, that's an oxymoron, but it would be likely that if there is going to be a cost increase anywhere, it's going to be when we are doing the demolition of the Parkview Elementary School, because of course we don't necessarily know what's under it, and there's a lot of mitigation necessary, which they've worked into it, but things happen when you have literally a containment site, and there are going to be very special parameters around taking down a building with so much asbestos in it and so forth. So if there are going to be any surprises, it won't be until the end of the project. So we certainly hope it stays this way. The other end of surprises is usually in the beginning when you break ground, because you're not always sure what's underground. And we did have one surprise that caused a short delay, but we were able to recoup that very quickly, and it didn't cause a huge increase of expense for us. It's part of the contingency at this point. So we've got 50% of that period out of the way. The building's going very smoothly now, and we anticipate that will be the case. Hopefully it will be buttoned up before we're too far into the winter, so they can turn their efforts on the indoors. But the unknown, of course, is when you break ground, or when you start to dismantle a building that we know has as many issues as Parkview has.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anything from the select board? Jen or Jamie, anything you want to report out?
Yeah, so I'll just say that people probably noticed Main Street. I've seen a couple cars try to take those bumps now at about 50, and I'm pretty sure I have to replace a bumper. So it's good because it's working. And I think that was the whole point, was make it more safe for pedestrians. And we now have a solidified team. In fact, I think some folks on this call are on the wayfinding committee. So that's really exciting too. The Easton app is launched and fully functional and fantastic. If anyone's had a chance yet to download it.
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Isn't it? It's fantastic. So we were at the Harvest Fair and getting some really good feedback. The NRT Harvest Fair, which how lucky do we get with the weather as well? It was a fantastic day. The Green Communities Committee, which I'm also on, was represented at the fair for the first, well, not the first time, but this year it was fantastic. But we had the new banner for the app, and it generated a lot of interest. A lot of people came over, saw people downloading it right there. Probably in the half hour I was standing there, I saw about 10 people come and scan it and download the app. And so the more businesses we get involved in putting their information out there, it's such a great resource for them and easy for us to pass along to people, because a lot of people come to Easton from outside. They love the restaurants that, we're starting to drive a lot of communities foot traffic our way, and it's fantastic. And so we're one of 4 communities that are currently piloting this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Connor, I think Brockton, Stoughton, and the 4th, I forget, is it Norton? But anyway, one other community is part of the 4.
Avon, maybe?
Have
Say it
you,
again.
Was it Avon?
Maybe Avon, yeah, forget the 4th.
have you, I have some friends with kids at Stonehill, and so I've been telling them about it. Have you worked with Stonehill at all, or any of the surrounding colleges, to get the word out to the students as well?
Sadly, I am not part of that team. I think Mark Lamb may have, and if not, it's a great suggestion, but I know that team that he's on, part of the economic development team, is doing a lot of work in outreach. So great question, Jackie. I could probably go on with 15 other things that are going on that I think are positive. Jen, before I steal any more thunder, is there any?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. The wayfinding group kicked off was it last week or a couple of days ago? I think it must have been last week. Everything's a blur right now. And if you have a chance and are interested in seeing some of the ideas that were floated for the signage and some of the thematic ideas, it was a really fun discussion. And I think it'll bring a lot of value to the team and town in terms of setting a tone for place and space and kind of creating a brand, if you will, around Easton. And the other thing I'll just add is the other committee I'm on is the Affordable Housing Trust Board, which is actually meeting at 6:30. And we are working on the housing production plan, which is a requirement of 40B, and also a really good opportunity for Easton to holistically think about housing and how the kind of community we want, the housing resources we want to make available, and we should be making available for various folks across the socioeconomic spectrum. We talked a lot about affordability and availability and whatnot here. So it's a really interesting discussion right now that's broader than just checking the box on, hey, we need to hit this mark with a requirement for 40B. Like, it's a really valuable discussion that will help us think about how we shape our community looking ahead. So that's all I have.
And on that, to amplify that, the part of that housing production plan, so we have to do that from under state regulations. But I agree with Jen. I mean, we try to be pretty progressive on these things and not just check the box, but we need to have public input sessions, and the Housing Trust is having a public input meeting on Zoom at 6:30 next Wednesday, so a week from this week's meeting, to kind of get feedback and perspectives on updating that. It's a 5-year strategic plan for the community on housing needs. Easton has met the statutory requirement of 40B for now, but there are still there's a big difference between like complying with capital A affordable housing and actually having lowercase a affordable places for people to live. A lot of, frankly, starting employees in town and school government couldn't buy a house here. Housing prices increased like, I don't know what, 20% in the past 2 years, and they were already high. So it's great if you own a home already. It's great for equity. It's great for property values, but it's still there's still an incredible housing shortage throughout the Northeast. And so, thinking about how do we continue to push forward in a way that's positive and productive for the community. So that's next Wednesday at 6:30. And I believe the Zoom is on the town's website.
Great, thank you.
Just
Um,
one other quick one, Jackie, because it's really
Sure.
important, is that several of us were unable to attend, but today we were invited to join the Easton Fire Department and a few paramedics that are going through an additional, very rigorous training that is being taught, really medical school level training. And the only other person I know, Chief Alexander, being as progressive as he is, the only other department I've heard of doing this is Seattle, Washington, where they actually train their paramedics. They actually spend close to 18 months basically in medical school, going through and being taught by medical school professors. So this was happening down at Fall River today. We were unable to make it and join, but we had the opportunity to go and see some of this training that they're taking part in. And it's, I think, phenomenal for our citizens. And Connor maybe can speak to this too, but to know that we're going to have this level of education for our department at a very reasonable, I don't even know what the cost implications are, but it's, maybe you can speak to that, Connor. I think
Sure,
it's fascinating.
Within the existing, it's basically reallocating existing training funds. So in firefighting, increasingly, particularly in towns like Easton, an overwhelming amount of the service they provide is on the emergency medicine side and not on fighting fires. Thankfully, because fire prevention has gone, has advanced so much through building codes and fire codes and things like that. And there are advanced facilities like in Stowe where there are, live burn training exercises for folks to do really high impact simulation trainings for things that are high risk, low frequency, like a structure fire. And this is basically taking that idea and bringing it to the emergency medicine side of house. So this is working with a medical facility that has a relationship with health providers who have donated I guess I don't know what the modern term is. I donated tissue from folks who've passed on for paramedics to drill and train on, rather than just using things like mannequins for certain rare but high risk exercises like intubation. And doing so under the support of an MD, a service medical director, and staff on site. And so I did get to go today, and there might be a picture surfacing of me with a drill later with a mannequin for them training on things like they're going to have mobile ultrasounds connected to iPads in their ambulances that can sync with the hospitals that they're bringing somebody to. A really incredible technology, things like training on mannequins that are, from a capital investment perspective, too expensive for us to source locally. But the cost efficiencies are just not there. So this is, it's almost like a timeshare for using highly expensive training facilities that no community our size would have access to. But it would be centralized, and hopefully more departments will join. And so it's pretty incredible. The handful of paramedics, 6 of them, and the fire chief, deputy, and health director Kennedy all got in their scrubs to do a training with tissue. I am not brave enough for that, so I left. But it looks pretty phenomenal, and it's something that we're going to try to do as part of the department's push towards a bigger focus on community paramedicine, which was something that we did with the existing staff in this year's budget, was promoting one of the existing firefighters who's a paramedic and also a nurse practitioner to a shared position between health and community services in the fire department to get a state certified community paramedicine program off the ground. So hopefully as time advances, you see the industry move to a place where folks are saying, talking about the frequency of emergency medicine with the past tense as we talk about structure fires, now saying, well, preventative care got so great that we stopped needing to do all these emergency runs. So I think that's the idea. Really impressed with the facility, really impressed with the department. And so I think that'll be very exciting.
I just want to throw the website out there, last piece, but it's real easy. It's pcimed.org, and really worth pulling it up and checking it out. pcimed.org.
Great, thank you. Anything from FinCom?
Real quickly, we met the other day, welcomed the new members who just filled out Finance Committee, which was fantastic, and did our regular review of the warrant That was primarily all we accomplished there, but you may have noticed I was a few minutes late to this one. In my head, I had Finance Committee this evening, and that was all I had this evening. So I had to be reminded this meeting also existed. So, but yeah, that's the only update from FinCom right now.
Thank you. Anything else before we move on? Okay, so minutes. Approval of meeting minutes of August 24th, 2021. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the minutes? Okay, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved, Stebbins.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote.
O'Neill, second.
Sorry, yes. I'm rusty.
Sorry, yeah, I was trying to find them. They're in the Outlook event itself. So
Stebbins, yes.
sorry, yeah, are we roll calling?
Roll call, yes. DePietro,
DePietro, yes.
O'Neill,
O'Neill, yes.
Diaz,
Yes.
Cabral,
Well, yes.
Stacy,
Stacy, yes.
Reed,
Yes.
Wiseman, yes. Stebbins.
Stebbins, yes.
Great, okay. So next budget subcommittee meeting, Connor?
Well, we have town meeting on November 8th. And then after that, it's really pivoting into fiscal 23 planning. And normally the preliminary budget would be issued in late February, early March. So we could try to squeeze one meeting in maybe before the holidays, just to talk about whatever revenue forecast we have at that point. But outside of that, there won't be a ton. It might not be a bad idea to do that. And at that point, we could update on ARPA as well, if not sooner. But other than those two items, I don't think there will be a lot. Wendy, anything I'm missing?
No. Got it covered.
Okay, so what are you thinking? Do you want to schedule it now? Do you want to wait?
I would say wait. I have a risk of not being able to get everyone together, but I think we pulled this together relatively quick, just with a doodle poll or something. So we can, I don't want to ask everyone to commit their time now and have us not have info from the county or something. So, I will be in regular contact with Dr. Cabral and department heads on drafting some kind of ARPA plan and keep the subcommittee through you, Jackie, aware.
Great.
And once we know more and we have revenue forecasts, we can reach out and put something on the calendar, maybe early December.
Okay, sounds good. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so public participation looks like we don't have any tonight. So I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Stebbins, so moved.
Do I have a second?
Well, second.
All right, I'm going to roll call vote again. DePietro,
DePietro, yes.
Stebbins,
Stebbins, yes.
O'Neill,
O'Neill, yes.
Diaz,
Yes.
Cabral,
Well, yes.
Stacy,
Stacy, yes.
Reed,
Agreed, yes.
Wiseman, yes. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a great night.
Good
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You as well.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.